Good day, everyone. This is Haniel Getzi presenting on behalf of the elders at Malton Bible Chapel. A brief presentation concerning the plan to reopen Malton Bible Chapel on September 20th, 2020. And this is a tentative date. We're forecasting this date because we still have a lot of planning to do in order to give the saints time to process all this. So the date of this recording is August 23rd, 2020. And of course, things may change between now and September 20th. So any updates will be sent from the elders to the assembly. A few of the questions that we've been pondering during this time is, what is Malton Bible Chapel going to look like if and when it reopens on September 20th? As you know, the GTA entered phase 3, I believe, on July 31st. So restaurants have been reopening. Public venues have been reopening, not in full, but in part. And so we've been asking ourselves, what will it look like for the chapel to reopen? COVID-19 has certainly forced us to rethink the structure and format of our meetings. And so some of the questions that come up is, how do we minister to the young and the old and the shut-ins, those who feel vulnerable about attending or can't attend? How do we minister to children without a Sunday school? The public gathering guidelines indicate that there's no children's services. So how do we do that? How do we fellowship without food? And as you'll see from the guidelines, food sharing is not permitted. How do we show affection without touching or seeing each other's faces? At Malton Bible Chapel, we're very affectionate toward one another, so that's a change. How can we praise without singing? Indoor singing is banned, so how do we praise and worship the Lord without that? So we need the Lord's wisdom in our decision to reopen, and we need to get a lot more creative as an assembly. We need to be united in this decision. Ephesians 4:3 talks about the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So it's important for us to be united. Now, each of you will have received the link to this presentation in the email, and in the email, I also attached the guidelines for places of worship from the Toronto Public Health Organization. So it's a pretty lengthy 7-page document, but I would suggest that you read it when you have time, because as I go through this presentation, you might ask yourselves, well, where do these ideas come from? I just want to let you know that we're not being too creative here. We are following guidelines. There are a couple of instances where we've had to make the call ourselves, but for the most part, we are compliant to Toronto Public Health. All right, so even though the jurisdiction of Malton Bible Chapel is in the city of Mississauga, we have a number of people attending from Toronto, and the Toronto Public Health guidelines are very congruent with provincial guidelines, as you'll see. Self-screening. So we're going to have a self-screening policy when it comes to deciding on going into the chapel. You can't enter the chapel if you're experiencing any of the following symptoms. If you're experiencing fever, cough, difficulty breathing, a sore throat or trouble swallowing, runny nose, loss of taste or smell, not feeling well, nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea. These come directly from the guidelines. Also, if you've been outside Canada within 14 days leading up to your chapel visit, you must stay home, self-isolate, and call telehealth or a healthcare provider if you're experiencing the preceding symptoms. And that is the policy for self-screening. As of July 7th, 2020, the use of non-medical masks or face coverings is required in all indoor public spaces as per a new City of Toronto bylaw. So you come to the chapel, you will be masked. There will be masks provided as well if you do not own one. We hope by this point, each person probably has one, but if not, if you forget it at home or whatever reason, we will have masks in stock. We'll also have face shields, and I'll explain more about that later. There are exemptions for masks. Children under the age of 2 do not need to wear masks. Anybody with an underlying medical condition which inhibits their ability to wear a mask or face covering, persons who are unable to place or remove a mask or face covering without assistance. Now, it would be helpful if you had some sort of exemption from a public health authority. If you come to the door at Malton Bible Chapel and simply say, well, I can't wear one and I don't like wearing one or something like that, that probably won't be enough. I know that there are cards and other things issued for people who are exempt, and that's fine. So we would prefer that you have a third person authorizing that for you, somebody who is qualified to do so. Any employees and agents of the person responsible for the establishment within an area designated for them and not for public access or within or behind a physical barrier are exempted from masks. Anyone reasonably accommodated by not wearing a mask or face covering in accordance with the Ontario Human Rights Code. Now, there will be moments or certain time periods where certain individuals may not wear a mask at Malton Bible Chapel. For example, the preacher is exempted from wearing a mask when preaching and properly distanced from the masked audience. So we will make provisions for that the audience remains masked while the preacher is unmasked and distant from the congregation. Young children will have the option of wearing the less restrictive face shields. Let's say you have a child who's above the age of 2 and required to wear a covering of some sort, but fidgets with their cloth mask or something like that, keeps pulling it off. The face shield, which is pictured here, might be less restrictive, even though the government certainly recommends a more enclosed face covering. We're going to say that children who struggle with wearing a mask will be permitted to wear a face shield, so we'll provide for that. When you come in to the chapel, it'll be as though you normally do. You'll enter through the front door. However, we are requesting that everyone exits through the back door. All right, so we should have certain signs and markings indicating where you have to exit. We will keep a weekly log of all attendees. This is required for public venues to log your attendance, because if something happens and somebody does get sick, if somebody does get the coronavirus, this is speaking worst case scenario, we will need to know who was at Malton Bible Chapel on any given date. So this is a requirement. When you come back to the chapel, you will notice a lot of signage and markers. So they won't necessarily look exactly like what's presented here, but for example, we'll have reminders for hand washing, constant hand washing. On the outside door, we will say that you need to self-screen and don't visit if you are sick, if you're experiencing certain symptoms and so on. And again, it may not look exactly like the sign that's presented, but this is an example of one I found. There will be reminders, constant reminders to stay 6 feet apart and to social distance and to keep your face mask on. Regarding traffic, we would ask that much like traffic on the road, to stay to the right in the hallway and on stairs. When I was young, I attended a school that actually had markers on the floor, and this of course is as well before COVID-19, reminding people to stay on the right. So we have to put our thinking caps on when we're walking in the hallway and on the stairs to stay to the right, to allow the flow of traffic and to distance as much as possible. Now, there will be some gatekeeping and some traffic control in the chapel. However, we can't control everything that happens. So if no one is there to attend, please use your discretion and just stay to the right if you're passing somebody on the hallway or on the stairs. Each room populated by the congregates of Malton Bible Chapel will have hand sanitizer dispensers. Okay, it may not look exactly like this, but according to the bylaw, we're required to have at least a 70% alcohol content. All right, so this will be throughout the chapel and for your availability to sanitize your hands. We will be disinfecting all frequently touched surfaces on a regular basis. Now, regarding access, there are certain rooms open to the public and there are certain rooms restricted to the public. The rooms open to the public will be as follows: the main auditorium, along with the breaking of bread room for possible overflow. All bathrooms will be accessible by the public on both floors. Now, the playroom that's adjacent to the bathroom, this is important for parents of young children, because as you'll see on the next slide, the small nursery will be restricted. So that playroom that's adjacent to the bathroom There will be a maximum capacity that's yet to be determined. It'll be a single figure one, like about 5 people. That will be for young children who feel restless or need to be attended to during the service. All right, and every parent is responsible for their child. And so we have allocated this room, the playroom, as a place where children who need attending can go to. And again, there will be a limited capacity in that room. Which brings us to our next slide about the rooms closed to the public. All of the Sunday school classrooms will be restricted, including that central room. Jan Lee's class used to meet in that central room. There'll be no access to the kitchen, the gym, or the small nursery. So those of you who are bringing young children who typically use the small nursery will now have to use the playroom. And you might have some feedback about that, and that's fine. But this was, we kind of in our brainstorming thought, how can we socially distance and keep people apart? The small nursery is too cramped of an area for multiple people to go into. So we've allocated the large playroom instead. And as you'll see in an upcoming slide, the services will be shorter and they'll be modified. So they won't be lengthy. Sometime before COVID-19, we had a 2.5-hour service, right? 9:30 a.m. and it concluded at 12 p.m. So we have shortened that. We've divided it in half. So hopefully the less time we're in the chapel, the less time you'll need a nursery or a playroom. That's our thought anyway. So that brings us to the proposed order of services. We're hoping to have a combined service in the main auditorium. That's going to be about 1.25 hours or 75 minutes. Beginning at 10 a.m., going to 10:30, we'll have our breaking of bread, or as we call it, a communion service, because we're not actually going to be breaking the bread, but somebody might do that symbolically, but I'll explain exactly how we're going to do the emblems. So much like it is right now in our virtual service, 10 a.m. to 10:30 will be communion service. Now, in lieu of Sunday school, this is something new that I've highlighted here. We're going to have a children's church. Everyone's going to remain seated in the main auditorium. And for a solid 10 minutes, either an elder or the visiting speaker will be conducting ministry to the children. It could be a Bible story, it could be trivia, it's going to be interactive, and it's going to involve the kids. And this is something that we really wanted to impress on you, because we don't want to exclude the children by any means, even though they won't be going to separate classrooms. And then following children's church, we will have, I call it the Family Bible Hour. It's kind of funny because it's only about half an hour is allocated to it. So I wasn't sure what else to call it. You can call it a message, but the speaker will have half an hour or so, 10:45 to 11:15, to give us a message. And again, it's somewhat similar to what we're doing virtually. We have a half-hour breaking of bread, and then we seg into a half-hour message or so. But now we're going to have the children's church as kind of the centerpiece, the thing that bridges the two main services together. Now we have a floor plan for the main auditorium. As we mentioned, all the services will be conducted in the same room. We are permitted to have 30% capacity. So what we're suggesting is that members of the same bubble can sit together. We know that there are certain households at Malton Bible Chapel where you have been socializing as the restrictions have been removed, and throughout spring and summer, the government has said, okay, you can have your own social circle. And so members of the same bubble can sit together. Children must always stay with their parents and sit with their parents. We are not permitted to have any physical contact with anyone outside of our bubble. And at least 2 seats must separate you from those outside of your bubble. So James Chanko came up with this floor plan, and it's an excellent floor plan. So you'll see that there are several rows of 6. There are 5 rows of 6 on the left side. So this is the pulpit here, and this is the door as you enter, door to the foyer as you enter in. And on the right wall, there is 4 rows of 5. Okay, so 5 rows of 6, 4 rows of 5 with an aisle, 6-foot aisle separating. So a family my size will require 6 people, so we would be in one of these rows here. However, if we were to bring 2 guests, we would take up a row of 6, and then our two guests would be in the next row. And then whoever else is in that row has to be separated by 2 seats because they're different, they're part of a different bubble, right? And so if you come from a smaller family, you can take up a row of 5 on this end here. And the same rule applies. We are not going to move chairs. The chairs are going to remain where they are. The chairs are going to be stationary. There's not going to be any shuffling of chairs. However, there may need to be shuffling of people. Some people are just a couple. For example, a couple, they might want to sit in a row like this. So here's a married couple sitting, these green seats here. And then an individual from another bubble can be at the end row with these two red seats represent the space. Nobody is sitting there. All right, and then it continues on row by row. This might warrant some further explanation if anyone does not follow. Now, basically, we're having 50 seats. What it comes down to is there are going to be 50 seats in the auditorium, and we can only fill rows if they are part of the same bubble. If we can't fill that row, they will need 2 seats separate for the person in the next bubble or a different family bubble. So that's how we're going to socially distance in the main auditorium, and that's how we're going to remain at 30% capacity. The room previously known as the breaking of bread room, the small room next to the auditorium, will serve as the overflow room with a live feed from the auditorium. All right, so that is being set up as I speak, and there's a work project involved there, the information of which will be at the end of the presentation. If you want to get involved with making alterations, that'll be helpful. Those of you who attended the 50th anniversary of Malton Bible Chapel 7 years ago will recall that there was an overflow room. The breaking of bread room, rather, was the overflow room, and that worked rather well. Now, for those who prefer to stay at home, we understand that even in spite of all of these measures that we're putting in, some may just say, well, I'd rather just stay at home for the time being. They might be apprehensive. That's fine. No one is going to be forced to attend the services at the chapel. It would be lovely if everyone did, but nobody's going to be forced to do so. So those preferring to worship from home can live stream the chapel service over Zoom. Which brings us to communion and the emblems. The communion emblems will not be exchanged or shared. And you'll notice in the guidelines that is something that stands out. They say no communion in the traditional sense. You can't drink from a common cup or pass it around or dig your hands into the same bread. So how do we get around that? Well, thankfully, we have this innovative device, which is a pre-filled communion emblem. And in that same unit, it will contain a wafer and grape juice. So these pre-filled communion emblems will be supplied to each participant. So there'll be some point during the service where those who are taking of the emblems will be asked to remove their mask, take the emblems, and then put their mask back on. Regarding offerings, not much is going to change from what we've been doing for the last few months. You can either e-transfer to Malton Bible Chapel 1963 at gmail.com, or there will be a physical deposit into a common destination. That's still being worked out. No basket will be passed around, though. That will be a thing of the past, or that'll be something that will not resume for a while. So either e-transfer to the destination Malton Bible Chapel 1963 at gmail.com, or deposit it to a common area. Everyone will be permitted to bring their own reusable water bottle. However, no snacks or beverages will be served. There won't be any potlucks, and there will be no access to the kitchen. Now, you'll notice from this proposed schedule that there is no formal intermission. However, obviously, if somebody has to use the bathroom, young and old, you'll be permitted to leave the auditorium to do so. And if you need to get some fresh air, you're welcome to go outside, weather permitting, and to do so. And young parents are able to take their children to the main playroom. So while we have no formal intermission, we're not keeping people in the main auditorium against their will. There'll be an opportunity to have fellowship outside, have some social time outside as the weather permits in the parking lot after the service. However, it doesn't mean that everything's okay in terms of this is that you have to limit your space and contact with one another. So we would just ask that you use your discretion and still maintain some distance, even though you're allowed to remove your mask. You don't have to, but you're allowed to remove your mask outdoors and social. And we do need that interaction. So looking forward to having some outdoor fellowship after the service. Unfortunately, indoor singing is prohibited. It's not allowed. So songs will either be recited or played digitally. So I know that a couple of technicians are looking into that right now. So we will have some form of musical program, but it will not be what we're used to. It will not involve us singing together. In accordance with government regulations, baptisms are on hold for the time being. There is work being done to the baptistry, and we'll be ready to hold baptisms once the guidelines allow us to do that. However, for the time being, baptisms are on hold. It says specifically in the government regulations that any rites or traditions having to do with water, shared water, cannot be done. Wednesday night prayer meeting will continue to be held virtually over Zoom. That is indefinitely. We don't foresee meeting in person in the near future, so that's on Wednesday. So we'll continue holding over Zoom, and we hope as many of you can join us. The aforementioned measures apply to all building occupants, whether we're called Malton Bible Chapel or 10, the Spanish Church. These apply to all of us, so we all have to follow the measures. So in conclusion, to answer the question, how long are we going to meet like this? We don't know. We don't know how long these measures will be in place. We are taking the lead of the government. Decisions like these cannot move forward without much prayer and planning. So please continue to pray with us and for us. And following this presentation, please fill out the survey form, the link to which I emailed you. It's important for us to know who's coming. Now, your submission will be private in that not everyone will be able to see it. The elders will know who's coming, and so there are a few options for you to consider. So please fill that in after you watch this. If you wish to help with the building alterations, please contact Donovan Brown at the listed phone number or email him personally. Donovan is running the alterations, so it's important that anybody wanting to help doesn't just show up. Right? We still have to follow the guidelines and measures for these work projects. So you have to let Donovan know in advance if you're coming. For any other questions or feedback, please contact the elders. You can use the same email address that you do for e-transfer, Malton Bible Chapel 1963 @gmail.com. Or if you have a direct line to a specific elder you wish to share some thoughts with, please do that. Okay, so that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you were able to understand it all. Any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. God bless you.